Good evening. The Ranter comes to you with rather a ranting review as opposed to a rambling diatribe of the news of the day. So, something changed. What I'm actually going to be doing is doing a non-spoiler review and talk about the things surrounding it, because I do rant, concerning X-Men 97. X-Men 97 is the animated series that takes off after the original X-Men, the animated series that played during the early and mid-90s. And before I get into what I think about the show and the other show, is let's give a little bit of back history of myself concerning this. Before X-Men came out, the cartoon series, I didn't really read any comics one way or the other. I wasn't a DC or a Marvel person. Around the same time that X-Men was coming out, Batman the Animated Series also was coming out, so it was a great couple of years, two of the great shows, and but I really fell in love with the X-Men, and it actually sparked my curiosity and my interest to get into reading comics. So I primarily read X-Men comics, and I've been collecting for years. I have a whole list of epic collections that are great snapshots of the comic lines of the various Marvel properties: X-Men, Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man, etc., etc. So, like, for instance, like this one, epic collection, that thick. It is, unlike the trades that you get, which is as thick, they're not, which are not colorized. These are colorized, and they come with multiple issues. Some of them are independent issues, or like one-shots, and some of them have a full story arc involved in this. This one, the last portion, is the one that also connects with the story arc known as Executioner Song. So I've been collecting epic collections like that, some of them going back to like the early 70s. So I got to see a little bit of the really early X-Men groups before the giant-sized X-Men, which brought in the international X-Men that added to the group, like Nightcrawler and Storm, and of course Wolverine. So I collect the epic collections. I collected the Dark Phoenix Saga, Executioner Song on its own, plus in the epic collection, Extinction Agenda that came before then, and Fatal Attraction, which was the one where Magneto pulls out Wolverine's adamantium from his bones, which was a wonderful, gory scene to see in a comic that did not have any blood. Not really. But seeing it pulled out of his torn up body, that sometimes you just don't need blood. But that also led on to me getting interested in the side groups from X-Men, like X-Factor, first the 1980s one that was actually the original X-Men group that was pretending to be mutant hunters for the government. But they were really hunting mutants in order to find them and safely bring them to their own HQ for them to be trained and or to keep them safe. And then the other X Factor that was the official government issue group that was coming in the 90s. X Force, that came out from pretty much the students from the New Mutants, which was the actual official next generation of supposed to be X-Men, were the New Mutants. And then a lot of them split off to either, some of them joined X Factor, some of them joined X Force, and X Force was a group that was run by Cable. So I'm going into the backgrounds of all these books and so forth. Pretty much talking about how much I enjoyed the X-Men from the cartoon that got me interested in the reading, which got me interested in then it says, oh, what's the other groups like? So I picked up books from Avengers and Fantastic Four that was connected to the X-Men one way or another. Got into their movies, got into their TV shows, got into their games. My favorite series upon my PlayStations is X-Men Legends, which is the precursor to Marvel Ultimate Alliance, that series. And those are pretty good games, and it's worth checking out, because I still got my PlayStation 2, which does the 1, and does the first X-Men Legends, and then X-Men Legends 2, which I actually got on computer too. So that all said, I got into comics because of the show X-Men, the animated series, in the early mid 90s. So that background aside, so let's talk about X-Men 97. There was a lot of hype and a lot of backlash going into the very first episode of this. This only came out. It came out Pacific time at midnight on March 20th, which was today. For me on the East Coast, I had to wait for it to be 3 a.m. Well, I didn't stay up to 3 a.m. to watch it, but I actually watched it probably about 7 or so in the morning. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm going to kind of talk about involved in this. But first, from my personal observations, my opinion on this show, without doing any spoilers about the story, this is a great show. This picks up where the X-Men, the animated series, left off in its fifth season, its final episode. It picked up the story arc from there. It is connected from those shows to that. Not only connected as a story arc wide, a number of the voice actors came back to reprise their roles 27 years later. And some people have a problem with how they sound. I have to humbly remind them, it's been 27 years. Yeah, they're going to sound a little different, but not too different that it wasn't jarring. Some people think it's jarring. I can't, okay. But I'm going to go into a little bit upon my what I think is kind of reasonings of that. But the show is great. It's not perfect, but I don't think anyone should be either striving for perfection or seeking out perfection, and if they don't find perfection, then it's complete opposite and it's reverse and it's horrible because it's not perfect. No, come on. It's great. There were some little minor issues that I have with it. It's not really I'm not gonna spoil story arc or anything, but I'm going to talk about how the kind of the art design is. It is not bad, but it is kind of the artistic way how they have this animated, like the color palette and so forth, looks more clean than it does look gritty. It's not a complaint. It's just an observation. One of the lines that they draw around like faces and so forth and expressions and so forth, they're a lot more deeper. Like you could put like a felt pen to outline it around them. It reminds me a little bit upon later seasons of Archer, how that's animated, and how there is like this dark outline over like the character bodies and so forth. So it kind of reminds me of that. Also, there are a lot of moments where when they're doing dialogue, then they have to like do these zoom shots of like people's eyes, and while they're having conversations, and it's like zoom. It's like that does get a little jarring, but that's an aesthetic style, I suppose, and maybe it is also done in kind of a way to ease off on the cost of like the animations. So if you're not trying to animate every single conversation, but you want the conversations there, then you zoom in onto the eyes, so you're just not seeing the motion and the animation of the actual conversations. It's semi-frequent, but it's not dominating. So it's not all over the show that you'll see this like in every conversation. It's not like that. But it's enough that it's noticeable enough for me to comment on it. And that's like one of the few like critiques that is borderline, not bad, but I'm not jumping up and down happy about it, but it's not really a complaint. It's just an observation. But otherwise, the story flow was very good. It did what the X-Men the Animated Series originally did in their first 1-2 episodes, is when they used the character like Jubilee to be your gateway character, to be your POV, to ask, what are mutants? What did mutants do? How'd you get here? What is this? What did that? They make a lot of references to the X-Men, the animated series, for those who are hardcore or longtime fans like myself and everybody else who are as geeky as I am. But it also works in... It helps facilitates first-time viewers who do not know. They'll throw a lot of references of the previous show in there to spark curiosity to look back at those shows. However, you don't necessarily need to do that to understand what's going on. So they explain, they do a lot of exposition dumps to explain, what are we here doing now? What's happening now? So that's also good. Now, because I'm not going to go into the story arc and do spoilers or anything, I'm just going to say it's a very good show. It does flow very well into the first episode, into the second episode. They are doing callbacks not only to the animated series that came before it, but they are also putting in references of previous story arcs in the comics that they had never touched. And they're bringing that in kind of subtly under the seams that when you are a comic book follower of Marvel, Marvel? Anyway, if you're a follower of the X-Men and you're like going, oh wow, they're doing that. Oh shoot, are they really doing that? Oh great, that's interesting. Because, it's not a spoiler if you saw Magneto's outfit, which is the purple and the M, and that doesn't look like what you would normally see Magneto would be wearing, especially in the 1990s, which is for my time frame of X-Men. 90s is my jam when it comes to that. I like the earlier, the 80s. I like the 70s, and trying to dabble into the 60s because I like the cliche of when the stories are not all that complicated and not that convoluted, but a little bit more simple than it was back then, which I also will go into in my later conversations about this. But I have to admit that I'm not much of a fan of the current story arcs of X-Men, especially them on Krakoa. Because I'm not going to do hashtag that's not my X-Men. I'm not going to do that. I'm sure these stories are very well done. They're just not my cup of tea when it comes to it. So when they're doing Krakoa and all the events are going on in Krakoa, I'm not going to go into details. So just check it out if you're interested. It is a lot of it is a complete reversal of what is the point of the X-Men in terms of Charles Xavier's dream. And there seems to be... there is a lot of complications to it, and it's just not something that me in my old fogey age is really interested in, shall we say. But that being said, when it comes to this particular series, this is pretty good. This is very good. And I do like the references that they are doing in certain comic story arcs from the X-Men that they have not touched. And I was talking about Magneto's outfit that is presented. That outfit, the purple with the M, that is what Magneto wore when he was in charge of the X-Men. In the 1980s, Charles Xavier did go away from the Earth, left with Lilandra, which was his interstellar girlfriend that lived in the Shi'ar Empire. It's a big old story arc from that goes back to the Phoenix. So he went there, and Magneto, who was still Charles's on-again, off-again friend, very best friend, was given the run of the X-Men. And during that time, he wore that outfit. So in this X-Men 1997 show, he's wearing his circa 1980s outfit to signify this is the time period where he is in league with, in support of, and in charge of the X-Men. So which if you ever saw the trailer, that's what he was implying, that everything that Charles Xavier ever dreamed, ever worked for, all of his assets now belong to me, my X-Men. So kind of cool. Kind of cool point that they did that as that. So all the positives and some borderline but not negatives that I just flat out love the show, and I can't wait to see the next episode, which will be coming next Wednesday. Alright, that said, the real basis of my conversation about this show and why this does gear my political ranter in me is what was leading up to this show and what was people talking about this show before they saw one frame of it. Was it's gonna be woke? Oh no, it's gonna be woke. Oh my goodness, it's gonna be woke. It's gonna be Disney woke trash. I'm not gonna watch any of it. It's just gonna be terrible, and I already think it's bad. I'm not gonna watch a frame. No, don't corrupt my eyes with your wokeness. Okay. Now, this thinking is something I've noticed in what I consider the critic-verse. There is a lot of Marvel shows, comics, movies, that there is a bevy of critics that you have online that loves to trash these things. And some of them trash it after seeing it, which can be, justified because they're actually seeing it and then critiquing it from their point of view. And then there are people who are just watching other people's reaction to it and then going, oh yeah, this is totally trash, this is just totally woke bullshit, and I don't want to deal with any of this, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to watch a single thing. That's lazy. That's lazy nonsense. Yeah. And you will run into this if you just look up for any reviewers. Critics are getting... The basis of critics is supposed to critique the property, give you their opinion on it, and remember, it's just their opinion. You can still like something if they don't like something. You don't have to base whatever you think on what they think. It's like you don't have to base anything. You don't have to base my opinion on this show being good on your opinion if you watch it and you don't think it's good. If you are like an older fan like I am, and you don't like the art direction, or you don't like how the animation is working, or maybe you do find some political drama that you were not wanting in your X-Men. You will, I can't agree with that, but I'm going to respect your opinion not to like that. However, that's different because you just saw, and then you critiqued it and you thought of it on your own, and then you decided if you liked it or disliked it. That's fine. The critics who are making bank and getting the clicks of being as caustic as they can on a piece of property is pushing it out not only for the clicks, but they are either intentionally or inadvertently setting people up of going, oh, well, if he thinks that way, well, I'm not going to even bother. I'm not even going to look at it. I'm not even going to be curious about it. Oh, it's from Disney. Oh, that's just going to suck because everything's from Disney sucks. So it just sucks by automatic. So I'm not going to look a single frame of it. Come on. But what have I noticed of where this bit of criticism is coming from that is just so hyperbolic and a little bit toxic is the concept of it being woke. That is once again another Marvel property from Disney that is just too woke. And we're going to give examples of what they consider to be woke. Shall we start with the most ridiculous one? And then we'll go into the other one? Okay, let's do that. Alright, ridiculous woke. Now, this has gone too woke. Is the design of Rogue. And this is something I've noticed the past few weeks leading up into the episode. People are saying that the show is too woke because they have not presented Rogue in her usual, 1990s body type persona of how she was shapely and curvy and bubbly, right? You look at Rogue now, she's fine. She's still, artistically speaking, the character looks still beautiful. However, she's not as over the top voluptuous, shall we say, as she and almost every named female character in X-Men was. With the exception of Jubilee, because if you tried to do that to a girl that is supposed to be in the show in her mid-teens, then there's something wrong with you. Which she does happen to become that anyway later on, but I think that's when she ages up. Then she graduates to allow to be objectified. Good. Now, to the people who miss that Rogue, well, you can always go back to the X-Men animated series in the 90s and watch that to your heart's content. But I'll point this out, and I'll try to explain this a little bit. Yeah, back in the 90s, I loved seeing that too. Yeah, the Rogue like that, or Storm like Jean Grey like that. Oh yeah, it was amazing. They were hot. Yeah, because I was I was 15 and 16 and 17. Yeah, I was a hormone-driven teenager. So of course we're going to like the honeys, as big and bodacious as they were back then. I'm 45 now, and I kind of understand that, the 90s, the 90s appeal, at least for me, was back when I was a teenager. And now I have a little bit more depth than that. The hormone meter is a little bit down now, and now I have a little bit more control of it, as opposed to back in the day when control for any males of the puberty age, unless it's completely monitored by people making sure you are straightened up and acting fucking right, that's always over the top. So people complaining about it now, especially people who are my age, I think it's less about the artistic expression of how they generate the character, and more about what you actually want to see, and you're blaming other people for not being able to see it. We kind of see that in other topics, especially in other forms of real-life objectification that we can go into, but we're not doing because this is about X-Men 1997. So there's that. The other thing is the Morph conspiracy. Oh no. Morph is non-binary. No! 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 Take it away! Burn it with fire! Okay. In the 90s, Morph was a character that was created specifically for the X-Men animated series in the first episode into the second episode, To Die. Morph was a shapeshifter, which he shapeshifted into a number of characters, some of them male, some of them female. Okay? They didn't put too much stock into Morph, because he was supposed to die, he was supposed to be fridged, and was going to be the motivation, to be that arc for people to be, this is really serious. Alright? Morph gets into the comics later in the 90s. I mean, around the story arc of the last line of the show, he actually showed up in the comics during the Age of Apocalypse. The design of Morph in the Age of Apocalypse is the design of Morph now. Now, I'm only saying Morph as he because of the representation of what he was in the early 90s. Okay? However, you can understand that when they are represented now, they are not represented the same way as they were in the 90s, meaning that even physically they were not represented in the same way. Morph in the early 90s had like a base male persona look. He looked like a guy, dark hair, so forth. The Morph now looks like a blank slate until they transform. The base look of Morph is a featureless, white, androgynous body. Face, no expression, other than, even the eyes are white. No pupils. No hair. Just a blank slate. And then they transform into various characters of various genders. Again. They are basically genderless. physically. In these 2 episodes, they have not made any inclinations of if Morph would be interested in women or men. There is no sexuality involved in this, at least in these first 2 episodes. They have a friendship with Wolverine, which dates back to the first few episodes of the original X-Men animated series, which is why Morph's fridging then was a plot point for Wolverine. And there were later episodes during the first series, where Morph did come back and kind of was twisted by the character named Mr. Sinister, and had his mind twisted, and so he started tormenting his former friends as the X-Men, especially Wolverine. But then found redemption and showed that Morph then had PTSD concerning his near death, because he died, but he didn't really die. They just thought he died. But he was then taken by Mr. Sinister and brainwashed, and it was a whole big thing. And it did last a number of seasons into that first series. But there is no worry. I'm not showing, at least for now, that there's any like sexual ambiguity into this character. This character is a blank slate, essentially genderless, that transforms into one or the other through their mutant power. Therefore, they are non-binary. It should not be threatening. It should not be something you should be clutching your pearls over. It's fine. One of the last things I'll talk about is I have also seen the arguments of people who push back against those that say that the X-Men were already woke, that there were already analogs for the civil rights movement, that people have claimed that, Charles Xavier and Magneto, at the start were analogs for Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. That their struggles was akin to the civil rights movements in the 60s and 70s, and then that morphed or evolved into them being analogs for the LGBTQ community, especially during the AIDS crisis in the 80s and into the 90s, because Marvel and X-Men creators developed what was called the legacy virus, which was going to be mutant AIDS. And they killed a number of mutants, through the story arcs of that, including Colossus's sister Liliana, who she would later come back, and she's magic, and you see her in current X-Men comics too. But that was a strong story arc that spanned time of her death, to the point where it depressed Colossus to the point where he always stayed in his metal form because he didn't want to feel. And in his metal form, he feels nothing. And that's where he wanted to stay. And he even left the X-Men and joined Magneto and his group, the Acolytes, because he was angry at Xavier and angry of everything that's happened, and he just wanted to not be around anymore, so he went with Magneto. This was during the Fatal Attraction span. Now, people push back on X-Men being analogs for civil rights, and just saying that that's not something that Jack Kirby or Stan Lee wanted at the very beginning, that it wasn't like that. It wasn't that we had to go back to the original source material. It is never about that. Never, ever, 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 ever. And if you say anything about it being later on, that doesn't matter, because that's not what they wanted then. Okay. Alright, I put on a documentary, like a kind of investigative documentary upon this subject, because the person that was doing the video was talking about certain critics who are actually politically of a certain persuasion, and they're kind of using their politics to dump on X-Men 97 and trying to steer people away from ever even giving the show a chance. I will put the link in the description in this video for anyone who wants to check it out, because it's very extensive, and the guy does a good job in detailing these other critics who have an agenda in what they're trying to convey their message out for. But during the time, he also did explain that Jack Kirby and Stan Lee maybe didn't start out thinking that the X-Men were these analogs for the civil rights at the time, for trying to lend credence to this argument of the anti-woke. But the thing is that even if that's the case, that wasn't what they wanted in 1963, they realized that the X-Men as a property, as a group that they're writing, can be a civil rights analog. And then they made it so. There is an interview in that article, in that video article, of Stan Lee saying pretty much the same thing, is that then he realized that these were perfect analogs for the civil rights movement, especially during the time of the Vietnam War. And Marvel has done political things in connection with current events before. There is characters who are Vietnam vets. There's some characters who were Vietnam vets who were wounded and had lost limbs due to the war in Vietnam. I have one of my epic collections of the Avengers where they dealt with Watergate, where they actually had sideway cameos of Richard Nixon in there. So there is politics involved in this. If it wasn't woke and/or analogs for the civil rights in 1963, when they first came out, if you're trying to go all the way back to that first X-Men, where you see these classic-looking group of teenagers, some teenagers, some a little bit older, of the original X-Men, Cyclops, Marvel Girl, which is Jean Grey, Angel, Iceman, and Beast. You see them, and they are your classic. They're your classic, circa 1960, late 50s, good guy personas, clean cut, white, just American boys and girls, with just little subtle differences. Angel, of course, has his wings, but he's still just a blonde, just a blonde-haired, handsome young man. Cyclops has his little visor, but still dark hair, a little brown-haired, and he looks how he looks. Beast, only different back then was Beast was that he had big hands and big feet. Otherwise, he has a chiseled jaw of a big tough guy that you would see in these type of comics. And Jean Grey, Marvel Girl, was just this. This is what's this typical what was drawn at the time. This beautiful pixie girl. That was cute. So I can understand how people back then didn't quite see the connections or the dots connections other than being mutants, but they didn't really go into the whole politics of the differences between mutants and normal people. Hell, their first opponent was Magneto, but Magneto was not the Magneto that everybody knows, even those casual comic book fans or people who see the movies think of Magneto, where he is a quasi anti-hero who will do bad things, but he does it for the sake of his people and in his remembrance of being a Holocaust survivor. The first time you see him he was a one-dimensional megalomaniac who wanted to rule the world, who was going after nuclear missiles so he can ransom the world for, $1 million or $20 million. It doesn't even matter, but it was that type of thing where it was just this maniac. Like when they drew him, even back from the 60s into the 70s, he was always maniac. He was wide-eyed and just shouting and just not what he became, and not what we know as Magneto now. So there are differences, there are changes that happened from that span up to the point of perhaps from Giant Size X-Men when Nightcrawler, Wolverine, Storm, Thunderbird, who died in two issues later, Banshee, who was a recurring bad guy, then got reformed, then became a member of the X-Men, Sunfire, this international flavor, which brought in the diversity. And you can see there was a difference in tone from the giant sizes just by looking at how they displayed the women. Now, when Jean Grey was introduced in the first X-Men, she was again this beautiful, cute, pixie young lady. Just what you would think of like, Donna Reed looked like. I mean, how they drew like Sue Storm in the Fantastic Four, just put red hair on her, just put her in a green outfit, and she's Jean Grey. When they introduced Storm in Giant Size X-Men, she was flying through the air naked, with just a loincloth. You didn't see anything because wind was rushing, but the implication was there. And she was sending the rain to people that thought she was a goddess. So yeah, a tone definitely shifted. So all of this I'm bringing up is just the challenge that even if you believe that the X-Men in 1963 was not woke, or not analogs of the civil rights movement, it became it in short order. And when it became that actually saved the franchise, because X-Men wasn't doing all that good in its first run. And it was sliding down. When Giant Size X-Men showed up and these new characters showed up, all of a sudden the sales came back up. And still, the greatest, most bought comic for the Marvel line for X-Men was the Jim Lee X-Men that came out in the 90s, that pretty much spanned. It went from there. They took that inspiration for the X-Men animated series from these comics, as well as the previous pilot that did not make it, Pride of the X-Men, that you can still find a video of that one episode. You can still find it, where Wolverine is Australian, but never mind that. But the seeds of what would become the X-Men animated series came from Pride of the X-Men. Pride of the X-Men, incidentally, was the inspiration that was made the inspiration to one of the great arcade games, which was the X-Men arcade game. That came directly from Pride of the X-Men. So, like I said, as I finish this all out, because I'm not going to do too much on this anyway, I recommend people checking out X-Men 97. If you like it, awesome. We'll talk about it. If you don't like it, just as well. Everyone has different tastes, and no one needs to like everything I like. But give it a chance. Give it a chance. Check it out on Disney Plus. Again, you like it, don't like it, either way is all good. But don't try, and try not to, at least. Form your opinion on something that you do not see based on the reviews of others who just show you clips so that they can trash the clips. There's a lot to offer in X-Men 97. I think it's a good show. Yeah, I'm going to watch it. And hell, between the Wednesdays when these come on, I have X-Men the animated series from the early 90s. It tied me over. I got my X-Men games. I got the Marvel games. I got the movies. This is a great time for Marvel, especially as we're getting into the later of these Marvel stages in movies where X-Men are finding their way back home into Marvel, into the cinematic universe. Just wait for Deadpool 3. Alright, the Ranter rants, because the urge to rant is always rising. I am glad to do this. I'm glad to have a happy video. That's something I'm happy to see and happy to talk about. And I appreciate those, dozen of you who watch these things of me, speaking into the void. So thank you for checking this out, if you do check it out. And y'all have a good night. And I'm sure I will see you later when I find something to be pissed at. Probably something to do with Trump.